As the expectation of enlightenment increased for men and women of higher status, lower middle class and the poor all stayed faithful to the church and its tradition. The church was still the center point of everyday life, holding weddings, funerals, and baptisms, while they were also in charge of bookkeeping, charity, and education of the town. These tasks were performed by the pastor or priest, who had a duty to keep religious hierarchy in place while stabilizing the church and others' lives. State control of religious institutions became the norm at this time. Spain, for example, took state control of ecclesiastical appointments and instituted the Spanish Inquisition. Another example of increased state control was when Louis XV exiled the Jesuits, who were then dissolved by Rome. In Austria, Joseph II only permitted monasteries and convents that were involved in productive work. Since the Reformation, Protestant princes and monarchs had placed themselves as the head of their respective churches. They regulated what went in and out of the church at all times, with the help of other Protestant authorities. Because of their efforts to increase control over the churches, vigorous religious rivalry began between Germany and England. Tensions also rose in Catholic countries where nobles and monarchs were being accused of unholy practices. The Protestants sought to purify their religion by suppressing all unnecessary medieval practices. Reformers shifted from the practice of keeping lavish art to a simpler, plainer house of worship. In Germany, a new religion was introduced: Pietism. Pietism had three main aspects. First was enthusiasm in prayer and worship. Next was emphasis on the priesthood of all believers, that anyone could interpret the Bible if they believed. Finally, all Christians must lead moral lives. This new religion appealed greatly to John Wesley, who led a religious revival in England. Like Luther, Wesley felt worries about salvation. These worries rose from the unstable religious problems in England. The government began to use the Church of England to give those who were favored jobs. Churches were seldom built, services were uninspiring, and religion was becoming more and more separated from everyday life. Due to the wrongdoings occurring around him, Wesley started to spread his message of hope, free will, and universal salvation through open-air sermons and finally won converts. A new denomination was created, the Methodists. Evangelicals and other groups began to follow Wesley's example. Catholic churches were visually rich, filled with Baroque art. Catholics stayed heavily religious throughout their lives and passed down the Catholic tradition to their children. Priests decided to purify religious practices, stomping out any and all traces of paganism or religious superstition. Instead of using state power, they crafted a compromise between theological purity and the people's piety. The purification of the Catholic Church led to disparity between the upper and lower classes. Tensions rose. Religious celebration and recreation was held in carnivals once a year throughout Catholic Europe. Women gathered to sew and chat, while men gathered to drink and talk. While the carnival was going on in smaller towns, there would be urban fairs which had circuses, horse races, and boxing matches, as well as several blood sports, such as bull baiting and cockfighting. Bull baiting and cockfighting both included wagers placed on the severity of animal violence and the winner of the animal confrontation. In bull baiting, a bull would be stuck to a stake and savage dogs would enter to attack it. In cockfighting, two trained roosters attached to spurs would fight to the death. Many upper-class men and women looked down at the common people with disgust and disrespect for participating in the primitive blood sports. The 18th century nobility also believed that the culture of the common people was vulgar, sinful, and extremely unholy. The attack on culture, which began with the Protestant clergy eliminating frivolity, was intensified by the worldview of the Enlightenment. The shift in attitude increased the gap between the two classes, which proved to be an important factor in the class conflicts during the French and Industrial Revolutions.